quite a brisk northerly breeze, perhaps wintry over the highest ground. Temperatures 7 to 9 Celsius across the north of the UK, 11 or 12, so still a little above average for the time of year, but starting to feel colder as that northerly air sets in. The weather front, what's left of it, clears the far south through Friday evening, clearing skies for everyone as we head into the early hours, though still a little bit of cloud across eastern areas could produce 1 or 2 light showers. Under the clearer skies across central and western areas, temperatures -1 to -4 Celsius, leading to a frost a little bit higher across the far east where that breeze continues. But it means plenty of sunshine for Saturday morning. For those up early enough, the best of the sunshine across western areas. A patchy frost though, so quite a chilly feel. Through the day, the cloud starts to bubble up. The best of the sunshine will hold on into the afternoon across western areas. The east becoming quite cloudy. Still the risk of 1 or 2 showers again, perhaps wintry over the highest ground, but feeling chillier for everyone, 7 to 9 Celsius. But that's actually where temperatures should be for the time of year. Taking a quick look at the rest of the weekend and into next week, high pressure holds on, it keeps it largely dry. There will be some bright or sunny spells, but that might lead to a frost at night time. And temperatures generally by day around average for the time of year, but feeling a little chilly.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Hello and welcome to Andrew Pearce here on GB News with you until 2 o'clock. We're going to go straight to Northern Ireland, though, where the police are updating on the shooting in Omagh after 4 arrests yesterday, the shooting of the police officer John Caldwell.
Thank you for coming today to what you will see is a hugely important and symbolic moment for policing and for this investigation. We do not underestimate from the point of view of the police service how important it is that we are joined today in an act of unity from all the political parties across Northern Ireland. Clearly, we know from what we've done so far and from commentary from across the community and the political spectrum, the sheer sense of outrage at this pointless and senseless attack on Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell. John remains in hospital where he is critically ill and heavily sedated. We have arrested a further man overnight in relation to this investigation. He's now in custody and also being questioned by detectives. Since we spoke yesterday, last night I had the chance to speak to John's wife and his son. They are clearly heavily affected by what they've gone through, but want to pass on their thanks both to the people that rendered first aid and care at the scene, but also in terms of the outpouring of support from across the community in relation to this awful outrage. Clearly today we've had a chance to talk to political leaders about the pace and context of this investigation, what it means for policing and what we sense will happen in the next few days. But again, we echo our thanks because it has rippled through the organisation about how important it is that we're joined by the political leaders today in this unique time to show that we stand together and call out this outrage for what it is. We'll take questions in a few moments, but I'll leave it to political colleagues now to add a few words one by one if they want to.
Okay, well, thank you to the Chief Constable for giving us the briefing today and bringing us up to speed with the investigation. I think that it is so important in moments like this that we stand united, and we do stand here united as one voice in our condemnation against this horrific attack on a police officer, someone who's part of our community. And I think that the most powerful message that we as political leaders can do is to stand with the Chief Constable today, to stand with the police service and to say this is not good enough, this is an attack on all of us, this is an attack on our community. And finally, the only other thing that I would want to say today is that my thoughts very much remain with the family. This is a family who are going through a trauma. These are a family that are sitting at a hospital bed. This is a son who's witnessed his father being attacked in this callous way. So my thoughts are very, very much with John's family today.
On behalf of my own party, I would like to extend to the Chief Constable and his colleagues, and of course to DCI John Caldwell and his family, our thoughts and prayers at this time. We continue to pray that DCI Caldwell will make a good recovery from the terrible injuries that he has sustained, and also to say to all of those very brave men and women who each day serve our community so faithfully and with great courage, that we all stand with you. You have our continued support. But words are good. We also need to ensure that the PSNI has the resource that it needs to carry out its job effectively. And we will work together as parties, engaging with the government to ensure that that resource is made available to the Chief Constable and to the PSNI. And we hope to have the opportunity to do that in the coming days. I would also say to the evil people who carried out this heinous attack and to their organisation, you are not the future of this place. We stand against you. The murder of police officers and the attempted killing of those who serve our communities in Northern Ireland was unacceptable when my cousin was the first RUC officer to be murdered by the IRA in 1970. Loyalists have also killed police officers. It was never acceptable, and it is not acceptable now. It will not be tolerated, and we stand foursquare with the police to ensure that those who have been responsible for this attack are brought to justice, and that they do not dictate how this place moves forward for the future.
Today, all 5 political parties in Northern Ireland are standing shoulder to shoulder with the Chief Constable and indeed all of the brave men and women of the police service of Northern Ireland. All 5 parties are utterly united in rejecting terrorism and standing up for the rule of law and democratic principles. That's the only foundation on which this society can work. We are determined that those responsible will be brought to justice, and indeed that the police have the resources that they need to do their job properly. The immediate family of John Caldwell are very much in our thoughts, as are the wider police family themselves. We are very conscious of the impact that something like this can have upon police morale, but I think it's equally important to stress that what we're hearing back from the front line is a determination and a resilience to do their job on behalf of the community, and they have our full support in that regard.
The attack on John Caldwell was an attack on a husband. It was an attack on a father. It was an attack on the community of Omagh. It was an attack on our society. It's an attack on our children. It's an attack on our peace, our hard-won peace, and it's an attack on the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. But it will not work, because we do stand united. And as the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, I stand with the leader of Sinn Féin. of the DUP, of the Alliance Party, of the SDLP. And we tell these people out there who through word or deed, who try to undermine our peace, it will not work, because we will stand united. And we will ask our society to do similar, to raise their voices against these people and say, you do not belong here. What you stand for does not represent us. You will not undermine what we have achieved in the last 25 years for your own vile, depraved ends. We will overcome this, and I will stand with the Chief Constable and with his PSNI officers to ensure that is the case.
Well, first of all, it's important that we send our love and support to John and his family, and also our solidarity to every single PSNI officer who's at work today, and we want to let them know that they are part of our community and that they have all of our support. The people standing here are the representatives of the people. Those people who carried out this attack represent nobody. They will achieve nothing. They think they're at war with the British state. They're at war with the people of Ireland. And from my perspective, that is a battle that they will never, ever win.
Today you're here together for a strong image, a strong photograph. What next? What can you do next to continue the message that you're trying to convey today?
Well, that was a dramatic press conference. The leaders of all 5 political parties in Northern Ireland joining forces to show a united front after the senseless shooting of Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell, shot in front of his 15-year-old son after he'd been training a local football team, loading footballs into his car. It was a classic way the IRA operated in the dark days of the Troubles. They would often attack off-duty police officers or soldiers. It was done by a dissident group, but really important to see Sinn Féin, the DUP and all parties united there in condemning this act of senseless violence. And we wish Detective Chief Inspector Caldwell well. In the studio with me is Kevin Craig, long-time supporter of the Labour Party. Kevin, there was a reference there to the Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement. It's the 25th anniversary of that in April, one of the great successes of Blair's administration, finally bringing peace to Northern Ireland. But some dissidents have never really accepted it.
A minority haven't, Andrew. And you know what's really striking about what we've just seen is the coming together of the top political parties in Northern Ireland over this one horrific attack. You know, when in that region, in Northern Ireland, thousands died. That's how far we've come. I'm greatly heartened today by the political unity there. And we all wish, you know, the injured policemen very well, and also the efforts to keep the process moving forward. In the days of the Troubles, of course, Sinn Féin was always regarded as the political voice of the IRA, but it's so important there to see Michelle O'Neill, the leader of Sinn Féin, shoulder to shoulder with the other political leaders. Yes, and you know, my own background is deep roots in the nationalist Catholic communities, but the great thing now is that there is a consensus around the fragile peace. There are processes that came out of the Belfast Agreement which are worth fighting for, and you know, today is very, very encouraging. Yeah, absolutely. And we really wish Detective Chief Inspector Caldwell well. Terribly shocking for his son to have to witness that. His dad was shot multiple times. There have been 4 men have been arrested. So the best of luck with that police investigation. Now, of course, it's a year ago today that Russia invaded Ukraine in a major escalation of the conflict, which began in 2014 when Russia annexed parts of the Crimea. Putin thought it would all be over in days, but of course there's been tens of thousands of deaths on both sides of this war. Millions have fled in desperation, causing Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. And as we mark this solemn anniversary and the war, which has offered many lessons in defence, diplomacy, we will be going to Kiev. And also we're going to talk now to GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White, who's got this very special report marking that first anniversary.
"12 months on from the Russian invasion, the battle across Ukraine continues to rage on many fronts. none more fiercely than here in the eastern city of Bakhmut, where Putin's forces are desperate for a symbolic victory ahead of their major spring offensive expected any day. Hardly a building here is untouched by the months of shelling and missile strikes. The life expectancy for troops on the front line around Bakhmut isn't measured in weeks or days, but in hours. Yet somehow Ukrainian forces are continuing to hold out. As this embattled nation enters its second year of conflict, the toll on Ukraine's military and on its civilian population is unbearably grim. They are in desperate need of more aid. The US President's visit to Kyiv was the headline act in a chorus of world leaders in recent days lining up to proclaim their support for Ukraine. But the chair of the Commons Defence Committee says it's now time for those leaders to speed up their military support.
We've been too hesitant to date to provide the necessary hardware. A year it took for us to pluck up the courage to provide the tanks, and now we're having the same debate about air power as well. We should recognize that this is about Russia, standing up to Russia. Ukraine happens to be the theatre of war.
President Zelensky could not have been clearer on his recent trip to the UK. He's desperate for Western fighter jets. For now, Rishi Sunak is only offering pilot training. Any move to supply highly complex kit, like aircraft, will not be quick, according to one former general experienced in logistics. And the longer it takes, the more advantageous that is for the Kremlin.
When you provide this equipment, you have to provide all of the capability of sustaining it and operating it. The ability to deliver this capability that he's after now to conduct offensive operations is not easy, and it will take a long time. And I'm not convinced that Russia's going to hang around and wait for all this stuff to arrive. It's going to conduct a major offensive to try and preempt the Ukrainian ability to conduct their own offensive operations.
In Russia, Vladimir Putin has effectively put his military and the economy on a war footing, setting up factories to refurbish old Soviet-era armour and massively stepping up production of munitions. There is no doubt, say analysts, that Moscow is in this for the long run.
They're going to continue this pressure. And as I say, we collectively, I think, are going to, we're going to struggle to enable Ukraine to hold out in this fight over the next months, if not years.
And there is another deeply alarming possibility on the horizon. US officials believe China, which has so far only provided non-lethal aid to Russia, may be preparing to offer weapons. Beijing says it has no such plans, but any move in that direction would be seen as a major escalation in this bloody conflict on NATO's borders. Mark White, GB News.
Well, joining me now is Ukrainian MP Alex Goncharenko. Alex, I'm just reading what President Putin said a year ago today. He said, whoever would try to stop us and further create threats to Russia, to our people, should know Russia's response will be immediate and will lead to serious consequences you have never faced in your history. We are ready for any outcome. I don't think Mr. Putin expected the outcome of the last 12 months with the huge NATO response to back Ukraine.
Absolutely. He lost all his objectives. He didn't take Kiev, he didn't install puppet regime in Ukraine, he didn't take Kharkiv, he didn't take Odessa, my native city. He, like all objectives he had, he did not succeed to achieve them. The only thing he achieved is like hundreds of thousands of losses, victims of Russian army, huge disaster for Russian economy, huge political disaster, and all of this was done by Ukrainian courage together with the Western military supply, weaponry. So, like, freedom is stronger than tyranns and dictatorships. That's the main lesson from this 1 year.
And Alex, the resistance of the Ukrainian people and army has been heroic. But can you tell me, how is morale now, a year after those tanks rumbled in to Ukraine?
Morale is high, and it's people are asking, oh, if it will last 2 years or 5 years, the morale will be high in 2 years and in 5 years also. I hope that will never happen. I mean, that we will be so long in war. But even if needed, morale will be high, because for Ukrainians, it is to be or not to be. Putin and Russia are committing genocide on the occupied territories of Ukraine. So we don't have any other options than to win. That's why morale is high. But definitely everybody in the country hope that this war will not last for a long time. And we can win this quickly. But for this, the only thing we need is more weaponry, long-range missiles, more tanks, fighter jets now. And with this, I think it's like up to half a year, and we will finish the war victoriously for us and for the free world.
Britain was one of the first countries to send arms to Ukraine, as you know, Alex. How important has it been that Britain and other NATO countries continue to supply military aid to your country?
We are extremely thankful to the United Kingdom. I saw yesterday Lord Ashcroft, and he did a poll about in Ukraine and other countries, and people in Ukraine are saying that the biggest friend of Ukraine is the United Kingdom. United States even are the second. Very close, but the second. So we are very thankful to United Kingdom for all support we are receiving. Now, by the way, in Kiev also a big delegation from United Kingdom, Bob Seeley or Ashcroft, like I told, other MPs. And we hope that UK will continue to show leadership, because unfortunately from European side, especially from Western Europe, we lack this leadership. And that was the United Kingdom, which was pushing allies to move faster, courageous, and to make very decisive steps.
All right, that's Alex Goncharenko. Thanks for joining me from Ukraine, and the very best of luck to you and your friends and family. Kevin Craig, really important, he's calling for even more military. We're sending tanks, but they need air cover to protect the tanks. Boris Johnson is saying, give them now. The Prime Minister's not said that yet, nor has the United States.
No, but I mean, as Boris Johnson knows from his time in office, you have to be quite careful and measured about when you provide support. I think, actually, it was the only thing for me that he did well in office was his actions with regards to Ukraine.
Vaccine rollout.
That not for today. That's a myth, Andrew. All
right, but another conversation, another time.
But it's basically, I'm very proud of what we've done as a country. There's political consensus. Keir Starmer was out there in the past week. Biden has been good, and I think more weapons will come. I'm proud that we, as Britain, are one of only 8 NATO countries to give 2% of GDP on defence, as we should. This is murder on the continent of Europe we're fighting.
Well, this is the most serious war since the Second World War, and it's very close to us. Putin, of course, keeps dangling the nuclear threat, but he's not going to go down that route, because it would trigger a nuclear conflict with NATO.
Yeah, he doesn't want that. No expert says that he truly does. And we need to be vigilant, though, because there are people around our own country saying that this conflict was because we poked the Russian bear.
Outrageous.
It is outrageous.
He provoked it.
He did provoke it. So take note, Nigel Farage, take note, Dominic Samuels and others, every time you say that.
And it's interesting, because I suspect Putin miscalculated, because when he annexed Crimea in 2014, there was barely a whisper of protest from the West, including the United States, including Britain. Britain then did start arming Ukraine because we thought another invasion was on its way. So he probably miscalculated and thought it would all be over in 5 days.
He did, and we all, as a country, nobody saw this. We all, looking back, that should not have been allowed to happen in that way. And this time, I think we're getting it right. And interestingly, that even a Ukrainian MP based in Kyiv knew about Lord Ashcroft's polling yesterday, which showed that we as a nation are proud of what we've done.
Lord Ashcroft was out in Kiev yesterday, and his poll showed 67% of the British people support the continuing military aid to Ukraine. And it comes at a cost, Kevin. So far, we've given around £7 billion. That would build at least 80 hospitals.
I know, but Andrew, I think you probably agree that some things have to be paid for.
I'm 100% behind this. I think we have to do it.
It's not easy.
And of course, if we'd allowed Ukraine to be overrun by Putin, where would he have gone next? The Baltic states? Latvia? Lithuania? Poland?
Well, our NATO allies are very, very, reassured by Britain's actions through this conflict, which have cross-party political support. And remember, I'm sure you know Ukrainians in London. When we say to them, how have we been able to talk to them in the last year? How are you? Everything feels so superficial, compared to what they're going through. And I just hope that we can bring this conflict to an end as soon as possible. It's not easy.
How does Ukraine win this? Because, that's a question I'm going to be talking to a military figure about later. Do they win if they kick them out of the territory which they've occupied in the last 12 months, or have they got to get back the territory that they annexed in 2014 in Crimea?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm very nervous as a Brit about answering that because I've seen the strength of feeling for Ukrainians. I think that the dealing with the territory in this most recent annexation would be a very good start towards peace.
All right, that's Kevin Craig. Now, he's with me in the studio until 1 o'clock. Coming up after a quick break, we'll be talking to a British father who travelled to Ukraine a year ago to rescue his family.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, Andrew Pierce here with you on GB News. As Russia invaded Ukraine, literally tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, fled into neighbouring countries. Some were unable to get out, and this was the case for Ian Umney's family. His wife and child were stuck, so he travelled from the UK to Ukraine to rescue them.
So my bag's packed. I've got everything I need in there. As a Brit going abroad, I need the most essential of things: PG tips and a cup. I'm leaving to the airport in about 30 minutes and then flight over to Poland. So I'm just at the airport in Krakow. There's a train going to the city centre. So I made it successfully into Ukraine last night, and now we're just approaching the outskirts of Lviv. In 12 hours I should be in the arms of my wife, and my son will be in my arms. So not long left. Guys, I made it. Yeah. It's been a long time, but I'm finally here.
Well, what a cheery film that was. Now, shortly after reuniting with his family, Ian spoke to GB News about how he was feeling.
Now, anger, frustration, worry, upset. I'm concerned for my family right now. I've had the utmost love and support from both people in Ukraine, Ukrainians themselves, people online on following my social media, and my family and friends. So we've had an outpour of support and offers of places to stay, and even paid flights to go and stay at someone's house in Greece. So The support is definitely there. It's just now it's down to me to get my family out. I'm the only support that my family has here.
Well, Ian Umney joins me now, I'm delighted to say. Ian, welcome. How is your family now?
We're okay, thank you, Andrew. We are comfortably settled in the UK. My son Jonathan is happily in nursery, and my wife is happily continuing her education here.
How difficult was it to get them out?
In total, it was very difficult. I didn't have a solid plan. I had no real idea of what would happen, but things happened quite nicely. They fell into place quite nicely where, we missed a couple of trains and we couldn't get on a couple of trains, but then we had someone who was driving out, and it was very, pretty much by the stroke of luck that we got out of the country.
Your wife, you say your little one's at nursery and your wife's continuing her education. Does she ever want to go back?
She does, when it's safe to do so. She wants to go back to visit her father more than anything because he can't leave the country. We've got his visa ready, but he just can't leave until March this year. But definitely we want to relocate back to Ukraine from the UK as soon as it's safe for us all to do so.
And so many families have been caught up in this, Ian. How is your wife's family? Are they all okay?
They're all okay, but because of where they are, there is shelling constantly. The Russians are just over the river, and it's hit and miss, if you'll pardon the expression. But her father was at work one day when a shell came through his factory roof. So it is closer than we could ever have imagined.
Did you think that here we are a year later and the war is still a long way from being resolved, Ian?
To be honest, I didn't think it would last for a year. The journey I took last year, the dash to Ukraine, as I call it, it was looking like the Russians were going to be coming up north to our city, and I was angry and frustrated and worried at that. But the heroes of Ukraine battled, and they're still battling on, and they're still defending their own territory magnificently. But we need more support, to be honest.
And your wife, you say she's continuing her education. Is she able to speak on the phone or by email at least to her family, Ian?
Yes, absolutely. She keeps in constant contact with them, and her mum's actually coming over for the third time in about 2 weeks, and currently her friend is here and she goes back in about 7 days.
And has she been heartened by the response of the British people to helping Ukrainian families?
Yeah, she has spoken to a number of Ukrainian refugees here in our city, and our son actually goes to nursery with one of the Ukrainian refugees. So she's had that community around her at the minute, and she's been very, very heartened by the support that she gets from the public, from the general public.
And what about your little boy? Was he aware of really much of what was going on? He's only little after all.
No, not at all. He had no idea, and in 10 years, when he looks back on this and he learns about what went on, he'll have a full understanding. But for now, he's just settling in and learning all three languages, Russian, Ukrainian and English.
Good on him.
He's doing fine.
Good on him. All three languages, Russian, English and Ukrainian. I struggle just with English.
Same.
Ian, best of luck to you and your family, and thanks so much for joining us. That's Ian Umney, whose remarkable journey to rescue his wife and child ended in success. Now, with me in the studio still is the former Labour councillor and candidate Kevin Craig. That's a really heartening story, isn't it?
A very inspirational man.
Yeah.
Amazing to see what the love of a father could drive you across Europe. What an inspiring guy Ian is. I'm really so moved.
And fantastic for his wife that there is a community which she can relate to and talk to. And that little boy, Russian, Ukrainian and...
Yes. I think your English is very good, by the way. I mean, it's almost like you've made a living out of it, Andrew.
funny that. That's Kevin Craig. You're listening to me, Andrew Pearce, and watching me, of course. Coming up after the news update, we're going to get the latest on the SNP leadership contest because the nominations have closed to replace the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. I, for one, am so glad she's going. But we're going to get the latest headlines right now.
Good afternoon, it's 12:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A minute's silence has been held across the UK, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain's imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and chief executive of Nord Stream 2. In Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the past 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died following Russia's invasion, which has resulted in the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. In other news, junior doctors will go ahead with strike action in a dispute over pay. The British Medical Associations announced they're set to walk off the job for 3 days from the 13th of March. It's after 98% of votes cast by BMA members on Monday were in favour of strike action. It was the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors, with 37,000 voting. And some breaking news, publishers Puffin UK have announced Roald Dahl's classic collection will keep the author's original texts in print. It follows criticism of recent editing of his work to remove potentially offensive language. It's understood Puffin will continue with the publication of the amended texts, as well as releasing the originals. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Andrew.
Well, still to come here with me, Andrew Pearce on GB News. We'll be live in New York, where the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly is due to address the UN Security Council. And also to mark 1 year since Russia's brutal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
So nominations to be Nicola Sturgeon's successor as a leader of the SNP and Scotland's First Minister, they closed at midday. Kate Forbes, she's still in the race, defying her critics after the huge row after she said what she feels she would have voted against same-sex marriage if she'd been in Parliament at the time. In 2014, she's up against Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf, who many see as the front-runner, and the former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan, who quit as a minister in protest at Nicola Sturgeon's balmy, in my view, gender ID legislation. Well, joining me now is our two well-known Scots, Brian Monteith, who's a columnist at The Scotsman and a former MSP, and also another proud Scot, the public affairs consultant, Piers Pottinger. Gentlemen, good afternoon to you both. Brian Monteith, she's stayed in the race, Kate Forbes. Why do you think she felt she had to apologise for saying that she would never have voted for same-sex marriage? If that's her opinion, why didn't she stick to it?
Well, I think she was making clear that she is a person of faith and that she makes decisions that she feels strongly about in principle and follows them. I think that the answer is that she is an honest politician, and I think that's a very important factor for anyone to have a leader.
And the front runner, he, according to a former Scottish minister, absented himself from the vote on gay marriage because he thought it might offend the people in his mosque. That's Humza Yousaf.
Well, yeah, well, that's actually very strange that he had an emergency meeting, but it was arranged 14 days or so in advance to deal with an unfortunate Scot who was imprisoned abroad. The feeling is that that was actually a suitable way of not being in Parliament to vote. And that's going to plague him, I think, right up until the ballots close of the SNP party members.
Piers Pottinger, if the result of this is that the SNP do much less well at the next general election, Labour could perhaps win 10, 12, maybe 20 seats, that's going to make it even more difficult for Rishi Sunak to win the next general election.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, Kate Forbes, I think if she did win the leadership, she would be the most effective of the candidates by some margin. I mean, she, although having her faith attacked in the most disgraceful way, actually there's nothing new of politicians in important positions coming from the Free Church of Scotland. In fact, Lord Mackay of Clashfern was an elder in the Free Church of Scotland and Lord Chancellor in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet, and a very redoubtable Lord Chancellor he was. No, I think whatever happens, Rishi's going to suffer a lot in Scotland because, sadly, there's no Ruth Davidson to lead the Conservatives. She was the only one with the real gravitas and also had a great connection with the Scottish people. And I think that Labour will be the beneficiary if they make the terrible mistake of making Yousaf their leader. I mean, he's been a useless transport minister, a useless minister of justice, and he's a terrible health secretary with the Scottish NHS in a much worse state than even in England.
Brian Monteith, do you agree with that?
Completely, although I would say that the idea that Ruth Davidson would save the Conservatives from falling back into third place is misplaced. Because I think what Ruth Davidson achieved was to be the figurehead for a unionist revival, not a Conservative revival. And what is likely is that if Ash Regan or Kate Forbes are leader, then they will, I think, seek to improve their SNP's domestic performance and not make the independence referendum the spectre it once was, which was what helped Ruth Davidson. Whereas the continuity candidate, of whom's a useless, as he's now being called, would look to continue with the referendum threat. And I think that would play into the opposition's hands. But Labour look like they're the ones who are now going to dominate the unionist campaign.
And Piers Pottinger, the reassuring thing as somebody like you as a committed unionist is with the departure of Sturgeon, this whole push now for independence has been set back by a generation.
It has been set back, and actually over her time as a leader, at her very best, she only improved people in favour of independence by 1%. And since then, it's now gone backwards. So she hasn't actually furthered the cause of independence at all. And I think intelligent Scots more and more realise that independence would be completely disastrous for Scotland and economically totally unviable. And also the idea they could go into Europe is madness because they wouldn't fit the financial requirements. No, I think sadly it used to be the Conservative and Unionist Party, and they dropped the Unionist part of it, which is a great pity. But I do agree with Brian that, I mean, Labour are well positioned to have a go. But if the SNP make the sensible decision, there are 104,000 members who are voting. If they all vote, I hope they do vote for Kate Forbes, because I think whoever is First Minister, it would be helpful to have a First Minister that one can at least respect, even if one disagrees with their views. And Kate Forbes is clearly the outstanding candidate in that sense.
Interesting. Kevin Craig, want to bring you into this conversation because your great leader, Keir Starmer, made a speech up in Scotland last week to the Scottish Labour Party conference. He didn't mention the gender ideal bill once because he's gutless.
No, Andrew, respect your opinion. He's not gutless. He just likes to talk about what Scottish people are interested in.
Well, it's brought down the Scottish First Minister, Kevin. It's a huge issue.
It may have done. But what do the SNP members care about, right? Interestingly, 65% of them, their priority is NHS or education and crime and society issues. 30% of them think the referendum should be the number one issue. So Keir talks about what Scottish people are interested, and I agree with the chaps there. What I'm heartened by, as a unionist, is that Kate Forbes is back as a clear front runner. She's on 28%, and Humza Yousaf is on 20, Ash Regan on 7. And I think that bodes well because he, quite frankly, is a hapless, accident-prone and, I think, superficial politician.
Yeah, and Piers Pottinger made a very important point. Lord Mackay of Clashfern rose to be Lord Chancellor in Mrs Thatcher's cabinet. He came from the same church as Kate Forbes. Why can't somebody with deep religious convictions be a political leader?
They can in our country. There's a long record of it. I mean, the way it was handled was poor because what Yousaf did, when somebody said, hang on a minute, you know, how's your Islamic faith going to play out with gay marriage and stuff? He went, well, it's separate. She should have done the same right from the start.
OK, I'm just going to go back to the gentleman for a prediction. Brian Monteith, who's going to win this race?
Well, at the moment, it certainly looks like Kate Forbes should win it, although that poll was of supportive voters rather than members, and we don't know how members will behave. She could end up being rather like Truss and being put in place by the membership and finding that the MSPs behind her don't actually support her and has a very difficult time as First Minister.
Piers Pottinger, what's your prediction?
Well, I think Kate Forbes might just scrape through. I hope she does. But again, what I think English commentators often forget is that religion is still a very big issue in Scotland and is actually taken much more seriously. It's still very much part of the infrastructure. If you go to the Western Isles on a Sunday, the kirk will be full and the Sabbath will be very much observed, unlike in England now, as the Church of England is disappearing down the pan as we speak.
All right, gentlemen, that's Piers Pottinger and Brian Monteith and Kevin Craig in the studio with me. And, of course, we'll keep you up to date on that SNP race to be the next Nicola Sturgeon. Kevin, in her resignation statement, it lasted 18 minutes. When Boris Johnson resigned as Prime Minister, 5 minutes. So she's not just... so she's self-indulgent as well as don't you think?
Well, I think Nicola Sturgeon is a person of substance who's given a lot of contribution. I know. Hang on, you're so interested. You cut me off.
I'm listening to you.
You know, she's done big things with her life, and I think when she resigned, she was entitled to have that time. Maybe Boris didn't have enough detail about his achievements to speak about.
OK, that's Kevin Craig. We're never going to agree on anything, he and me. Now, are you finding tomatoes and cucumbers in short supply in supermarkets? Kevin, do you do the shopping in your house? That's a no.
No comment.
No comment. Some supermarkets, such as Aldi and Tesco, have put limits on the sale of certain fruit and veg products. Bad weather in Europe and Africa has been partly blamed for the shortages. Also, higher electricity prices have affected production in greenhouses here and in Holland. The Environment Secretary, Therese Coffey, oh dear, she suggested seasonal produce like turnips could be a suitable alternative until the issue is resolved. Well, we're going to talk now to David Exwood, who's the Vice President of the National Farmers Union. David, what did you think of the Environment Secretary's suggestion, let them eat turnips?
Well, I think talking about eating seasonally is a great thing. Telling people to eat turnips, I think that missed the point, didn't it?
It did, really. Is there any end in sight to this shortage? We know there's been a big problem with frosts in Morocco and Spain, which has had an impact on the crops.
Look, we've been warning about this since before Christmas, so no, this isn't going to end anytime soon. The problem is that currently our food resilience is gone in this country. It just takes a couple of events which are very predictable. So in this case, the high cost of energy and the weather in Spain and Morocco, and we have empty shelves. We saw it with eggs before Christmas, and this will keep happening.
What's the answer?
We need a joined-up approach. We need a long-term approach from the retailers to reach out and build strong long-term relationships with their suppliers, their growers, the farmers out there, because we can do this. We can grow tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers in this country at this time of year. It's happening now. But we need the growers that aren't need the confidence to keep doing it. And we need government to take food security seriously. You know, again, you've seen the response from the Secretary of State. That shows the attitude of government. We need a much better attitude, one that recognises the value of growing and producing food in this country, as well as imports, and having a long-term plan.
She was turning the clock back, wasn't she, to when I was a child, when you ate seasonal food because you wouldn't be getting lettuce and tomatoes in February. That would be a summer product. But, of course, as you make the point here, David, farmers can produce all year round.
Yes, we can. And, look, we've got to try and give people what they want. The farmers are all about producing what the consumer wants. Eating seasonally, look, we've got our farm shop here. I will always support eating seasonally. But, you know, the world has moved on. It's a very complex food market out there. And, you know, people should be able to expect to have full shelves.
When did you last eat some turnips, David?
I actually really enjoy turnips. But, look, turnips and politics are just a toxic mix. And I think, you know, in the political playbook, don't mention turnips.
Absolutely right. That's David Exwood, who's the Vice President of the National Farmers Union. Thanks so much for joining me. I mean, Therese Coffey, I mean, talk about foot in her mouth.
Therese Coffey.
Let them eat turnips. I mean, it's let them eat cake. It's Marie Antoinette all over again. Although I don't actually think she did say let them eat cake, but anyway, she's not here to defend herself.
No, she's not. But, I mean, of all the politicians in the Cabinet who keep getting reappointed, and I know a lot about her because I spend a lot of time in Felixstowe in her Suffolk coastal constituency, I don't know of a single decent thing she's done in a decade, and she's so hapless.
She is. She was the one, of course, when she was Work and Pension Secretary at the Tory Party conference, had quite an lively evening at a karaoke session, was singing I'm having the time of my life at exactly the moment the £20 extra money that families on universal credit were given was being withdrawn by her.
Yeah, and I spoke to families in Felixstowe that weekend, and people were so upset by it, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I think she's put her foot in it again. I suspect in the next reshuffle she'll be reshuffled out. Now, a Ukrainian restaurant in London, Earl's Court, opened 6 months ago by a Ukrainian couple. They were on holiday when the war broke out. The cafe is filled with Ukrainian art and furniture, and they wanted to make it a place to reflect home as much as possible. So we can go live now to our London reporter, Lisa Hartle, who's at that cafe for us. Lisa.
Hello, yes indeed, and I'm joined by one of the co-founders, Olga. Hi Olga, thank you so much for showing us around. So, as we understand, the whole restaurant was an idea that you and your partner, Yuri, who's a famous chef back in Ukraine. You wanted to create a piece of home for Ukrainians here, and so the restaurant is full of art and furniture from Ukraine.
Right, we wanted to create home-like place in London for Ukrainians, and also gastronomic embassy here in London to represent our culture, to promote it for those who are not familiar could discover. A team of Ukrainian designers were working on the interior, and they brought many artifacts from Ukraine, like this authentic window frame from the beginning of the 20th century. It has mirror inside, and it shows how people nowadays protect their windows from bombing. And when the war finishes, hopefully very soon, we will remove these tapes. We call it Window of War.
And you've got so many things like this that mean so much to you. If we just go through to the restaurant here, you were telling me your mum and dad are still in Ukraine.
Right, in Dnipro.
And you spoke to them only today. Whilst I was here, you was on the phone to them in a cafe, and then they heard the sirens going off. And I can't imagine what that must be like for you and your family having to live like that.
And that's how people nowadays live in Ukraine. It's their normal life, and it's very stressful not to know what can happen next minute.
And you were saying if they're in a supermarket, for example, the alarms go off, what happens then?
You have to leave the premises, and the supermarket stops working, so you leave everything on its place.
How are you all getting through it every day? You're obviously a year on now. You were here when the war first broke out, and you're only expected to be here for 10 days, and here we are a year later.
Yes, life is that's unpredictable, but we're here now in this restaurant, and it's our mission to tell about Ukraine in the language of food and hospitality.
And the name of the restaurant, Myria, that means dream in Ukrainian.
Yes, it's our common dream of all Ukrainians now to win. It's a dream for peace and victory, for coming back home and uniting with family. Then it's our personal dream, mine and Yuri, to promote our national cuisine in the world. And it's also the name of the largest cargo aircraft, which was created by Ukrainian engineers and damaged in the first weeks of war by Russian invaders. And it's a symbol of our national pride. We dream to restore our Mriya.
And there's another piece of art I really wanted you to show us just around the corner here. So this was created by a Ukrainian soldier. Just tell us a bit more about this.
Yes, this piece of art is very special. It was created by Andriy Matvichuk, artist from Lviv. He is a soldier. When he was hiding in the mine from air bombings, he found this piece of metal there. Locals brought them bed linen, one pillowcase was embroidered. He cut the embroidery, combined these two pieces, waxed, and sent it to us as a present. And the name of this work is Blooming. It's our hope for a prosperous future of our country.
Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you. Well, as we've heard from Olga there, her and her team, this is a very poignant day for them, but they're thinking of their friends and family every day, and they just hope for the day this war can end so they can all be reunited again.
Our London reporter. Kevin, just finally with you, first anniversary. My worry is that in a 12 months' time, I suspect there'll still be war in Ukraine. Will the British public still be as committed to carrying on spending the amount of money we're spending?
I think so. I think inspired by stories like that, people who leave you speechless at their courage, I think we're in it for the long haul.
And it could be a very long haul. Mm-hmm. It really could. That's Kevin Craig, Labour man, consultant. We've managed to agree on a few things today, which is unusual. You're listening and watching me, Andrew Pearce, here on GB News. Plenty more still to come, but before that, we're going to get the very cold weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. A dry, cold weekend ahead for most. Today, a bit more mixed. Sunny spells across the north, quite a lot of cloud in the south, and a really cold wind blowing down the eastern side. We've got low pressure away to the east. This high will dominate our weather through the weekend. It's trying to move in, but it's not here yet. We do have this weather front sinking southwards, bringing a fair bit of cloud and some outbreaks of rain this afternoon to parts of Wales, the Midlands and southern England. Further north, we're seeing brighter skies, some sunshine, just one or two showers for eastern Scotland and northeast England. Quite a cold wind, though, picking up across eastern parts in particular. Elsewhere, the winds are light and it's still pretty mild in the south, 10, 11, 12 degrees Celsius. But as I say, feeling a lot colder than 8 or 9 on that east coast. It'll be a colder night tonight. Some patchy rain for South Wales and southwest England through the evening. That'll scoot away. A few showers will come into parts of the east. We may see a little bit of snow over the hills, but generally it'll be just rain showers that we see coming in, and not many of those. Most places dry. Clear skies for Scotland, Northern Ireland will allow a frost, and even further south we will see a frost, certainly in rural areas, and many towns and cities will get close to freezing. So it is a cold start to the weekend. It'll stay pretty chilly, despite some good spells of sunshine. Again, quite a brisk and cold wind in the east, and there will be a few showers here. It's not going to be completely dry. A few showers for central and eastern parts of England, but nothing too heavy. Certainly further west and north, it's looking like a dry day, but temperatures will be lower, a lot colder than it has felt over the past couple of days. As we go through Saturday evening, not a great deal of change. 1 or 2 isolated showers in the east. Most places staying dry. Again, where we have clear skies, there will be a frost on Sunday morning. Probably quite cloudy skies during Sunday, but still some sunshine coming through. Again, a brisk and cold wind blowing, particularly in the south, and temperatures lower than they have been. Goodbye.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, it's just gone 1 o'clock. You're watching and listening to Andrew Pearce here on GB News, with you until 2 o'clock. Here's what's coming up in this hour. It's a year to the day since Russia's latest invasion of Ukraine, which has left hundreds of thousands of people dead and trails of destruction and devastation. As a result of the conflict, millions have fled their homes in desperation, and an estimated 7.7 million now living as refugees. We'll also be digesting the latest GB News People's Poll, which shows there's a lack of trust in both the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Labour Keir Starmer in the handling of Brexit negotiations over Northern Ireland. 12% say Sunak, 16% prefer Starmer. And common sense has prevailed in the latest woke war after just a short while ago, Puffin UK has announced the release of the Roald Dahl collection is to keep the author's classic text, so that woke rewriting of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory has been removed. I wonder if that's because the Queen Consort spoke out. Joining me for the next hour is the former Brexit Party MEP, Ben Habib. And you at home, of course, are such an important part of this show. You email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's what's coming up in the hour. But first, the latest headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A minute's silence has been held across the UK, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain's imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. In Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the past 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died following Russia's invasion. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has warned the war could last another 12 months, but says the UK isn't in a position to send fighter jets to Ukraine immediately.
I think it's just really about managing the realities of saying that we just simply can't hand over Western jets and expect them to be used in the short term. I think what you can say is that if there are other countries with Russian or Soviet jets, which they could just transfer over, Britain will explore what it can do to give those countries that reassurance that their own skies will be protected. We've already done that in places like Romania and Poland, where we've flown patrols to help with protecting their skies, and obviously we have some air defence assets in Poland. So I think that is, to me, the best and quickest way we can help Ukraine.
In other news, junior doctors are set to take strike action for 3 days next month. The British Medical Associations announced they'll walk off the job from the 13th of March. Nearly 37,000 BMA members voted in favour of industrial action, the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors. It follows a series of strikes by nurses and ambulance workers. Puffin UK has announced Roald Dahl's classic collection will keep the author's original texts in print. It follows criticism of recent editing of his work to remove potentially offensive language. It's understood Puffin will continue with the publication of the amended texts as well as releasing the originals. Camilla, the Queen Consort, yesterday urged authors to resist curbs on freedom of expression. A fourth man has been arrested in connection with the attempted murder of an off-duty police officer in Northern Ireland. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was shot multiple times by 2 masked gunmen on Wednesday night. He was with his son at a sports centre in Omagh. He remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital. Police say dissident Republican group the New IRA is the primary focus of the shooting. Value products in supermarkets have been hit hardest by inflation, with prices rising more than 20% in a year. Consumer group Which found the cheapest supermarket ranges were much higher than overall grocery inflation. Cheese, milk, pork sausages and muesli are among the everyday items that have seen the biggest price increases. And nominations have closed in the contest to succeed Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister and SNP leader. Health Secretary Humza Yousaf, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes and former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan declared their intention to stand before the noon deadline. The winner will be announced on the 27th of March. Candidates must have at least 100 nominations from a minimum of 20 local party branches to go through. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to you, Andrew.
Well, as those Russian tanks rumbled across Ukraine's borders 1 year ago today, Vladimir Putin declared whoever would try to stop us and create further threats to our country and people, he went on to say, you will not be prepared for the outcome. Any outcome would be prepared for. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is in New York to attend a special UN Security Council meeting, and we'll bring you the latest from that. But in the studio with me, I'm delighted to say now, is Bill Jarodi, who's Professor of Risk and Security at the University of Bath. Professor, a year on, the Defence Secretary saying it could be another year. It could be 2 or 3 years more, couldn't it?
I think it's going to be a very long time because neither party can afford to lose, but as it currently stands, neither can declare a clear-cut victory either.
Right. I think we're just going to break to go to New York. If you hold with me there, Professor. I think we've got Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, who's in New York with the Foreign Secretary. Darren, good to have you. What's the Foreign Secretary going to say today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Andrew. From a glorious New York this morning, as it is here. James Cleverly flew over last night. There was a special meeting of the United Nations in which actually the UN yet again pretty much overwhelmingly condemns the actions of Russia and Ukraine, calling for a halt to the fighting. 141 countries backed that resolution. Welcome news, of course, for Ukraine. There were some abstentions, most likely from places like India, China and South Africa, and 7 countries that objected to that resolution. Unsurprisingly, Russia, but the other list are those on the periphery of international society, such as North Korea, Syria, Eritrea. I think James Cleverly is quite pleased with this, though, because there had been a sense, as you guys have just been talking about, that we're 1 year into this conflict. Trying to hold together an international coalition is quite difficult. There was a similar vote a year ago, which produced a pretty similar result, actually. So they will be pleased that it seems at the moment that the international coalition is holding. And also that James Cleverly's argument today that we'll hear at the United Nations is that it cannot just hold, it needs to be expanded. The support for Ukraine needs to be expanded, Andrew, in terms of increased weapons, particularly long-range missiles, military aid just in general to keep the country running. And of course, Britain has one of the few countries suggest that they're not going to take off the table the possibility of fighter jets. But it is a reminder, and talking to Foreign Office officials over the last couple of days, what they want to emphasise is they want to counter-narrative Vladimir Putin's speech this week, in which he talked about how this is a war of Russia against the West. And their argument here is actually, if you look at that resolution last night, if you look at the support Ukraine has, it's not just confined to the Western lines. It is different countries in different continents around the world. And all this, of course, while China today, they set out a 12-point plan to bring about peace talks. It wants to see an end to that conflict. But again, you listen to the Americans, you listen to the Brits, and they say, well, actually, China is playing this in a kind of two-faced way. On the one side, talking about the need for talks and a resolution, while at the same time suggestions that they could start arming the Russians. And there is worry that that could change the conflict.
Our political editor, who's at the United Nations in New York. Well, Britain was one of the first to arm Ukraine, but is the public supporting the continued level of aid? The latest People's polls show they do, with 2/3 saying we should continue to provide support, with only 8% opposing me. Bill Jarodi, Professor Bill Jarodi, who's the Professor of Risk and Security at the University of Bath. That's still a pretty strong figure, 66, 67% backing it.
Yeah, I think it's impressive. I think ordinary people have a sense of what's at stake here, and it's sometimes their governments that are more hesitant, as we've seen in the negotiations about sending weapons. There is an element of fatigue creeping in, I suspect, people trying to deflect onto the economic crisis, and there's also a kind of anti-woke brigade who basically say whatever Biden says, we'll say the opposite, and that's really unhelpful.
Britain has been a key player in all of this, of course. But even before the troops rolled in a year ago.
Yeah, and I think that's a worthy point to make. The way I view it, Andrew, is that there's two conflicts going on here. There's a war between Russia and Ukraine. And in that war, we should be very clear where we stand. We should side with Ukraine, a nation fighting for its own freedom and sovereignty, and that's absolute. But at the same time, there's a different conflict going on, isn't there? What's crept in is a proxy war between Russia and mostly the United States. I suspect the United States woke up fairly late to the possibility that this conflict was an opportunity for them to try and re-establish some kind of veneer of world leadership. And that, of course, raises the stakes considerably and leads to, the possibility of other players being drawn in, as your correspondent Dan in New York said.
And you think if Trump was still president, he was very proud of the expression America first. I wonder if the support would be on the same level.
Who knows? It's like, to me, quite difficult sometimes to draw great distinctions between what American presidents say and what they ultimately do. But what it's allowed is an America that had just lost a 22-year war in Afghanistan to kind of re-establish itself and get the European Union, wagging its tail behind them.
Did Putin fatally miscalculate in the sense in 2014 he annexed Crimea? No military involvement from the West at all, very little protest, actually. He rolls in a year ago, thinks it could all be over in 4 or 5 days. Did he underestimate the response of NATO?
I think we all did. I think the West underestimated its own response.
Yeah.
American generals were pretty clear that this war would be over in a week.
Yeah.
As indeed, were a number of other commentators right across the political spectrum. And what's been admirable is the resilience and stoicism of the Ukrainian people, ordinary people like myself, leaving their day jobs to go and fight for their freedom and sovereignty. I think, I've got a considerable amount of respect for them.
Let's bring Ben Habib into this conversation. Ben, there is a great political consensus here. All political parties are supporting it. But in a year's time, Professor there's talking about some fatigue creeping in already. That is a danger, isn't it? That there will be fatigue. Cost of living crisis will still be continuing.
There is a danger. Just going back, as you mentioned, Andrew, at the beginning, we thought this was all going to be over in 2 or 3 days, or perhaps a week. There'd be a blitzkrieg across Ukraine, and there would be Russian missiles pointing at Poland. And that was really quite a frightening moment for the West. And it is all credit to the Ukrainian people that they held Putin in check at that point. I'm a bit concerned, though. Sorry, before I move on, I think Putin has already lost the war. He's lost the war because he hasn't won it. And he's now stuck in a sort of trench war down in the southeastern edge of Ukraine, having given up quite a lot of the territory that he first occupied, having been shown up militarily, unable really to mount a definite offensive that would win.
Yeah.
And in that respect alone, the West has won. Geopolitically, we've seen off the threat that we feared so much would impact Western Europe. And I'm a bit concerned that with that success, we've got a bit of mission creep coming into our own, into our own political thinking. What I would like our leaders to articulate is what is our ultimate goal in this war? Is it pushing Russia out of Ukrainian territory? And if we're going to do that, are we going to give them the jets that they need to bomb Russian supply lines in Russia? And that's a very serious escalation of where we are right now.
Let's bring the professor back, because how does Vladimir Putin win this? Because if he loses the territory he gained when they first went in a year ago, that plays very badly at home. Equally, how does Zelensky win? Because he said it's going to be a total victory. Doesn't he have to get them out of Crimea too, which they annexed in 2014?
I'm going to avoid your question, Andrew. Because I'm not here to give advice to Putin but what my concern is, and picking up on Ben's point about this mission creep, is that we have pumped a lot of weapons into the region without a clear plan as to what the end game is. In fact, the whole thing has been largely driven by accident and opportunism rather than strategic vision.
Like so much of our foreign policy is.
Absolutely. It's a war of its time, but at the same time, you've got all these other players on the fringes from China, Iran, Turkey, even India and Saudi Arabia watching what's happening and, you know, holding their time as to where they're going to position themselves in the future.
Disappointing that India, which is developing its own space programme, has not supported the great, the 141 odd countries, what it was at the UN vote. They're still not supporting it.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's a surprise for people in the West to realise quite how many countries around the world simply don't buy into the West's actions and vision. You know, they've seen claims of freedom and liberty and democracy be attacked again and again by Western powers themselves, whether it's in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, you name it. We go in there, we make more of a mess. I think there's a degree of scepticism.
I mean, most wars are at the doorstep of countries like India, Pakistan, in the Middle East. And actually, Ukraine isn't their war. Ukraine is, you know, a few thousand miles away. I remember Lavrov joking when this war broke out that if Westerners were really...
The Russian foreign minister.
The Russian foreign minister. Saying that, you know, if you're really concerned about your insecurity in Western Europe because of what's happening in Ukraine, think of it as a Middle Eastern country and think of the aggressor being the US, and you'll all sleep perfectly well at night. And, of course, that's how the Russians see it. You know, they see this as no different to any other American or joint American-British excursion into some other part of the country.
Just final words to you, Professor. A lot of people say, why don't they just take out Vladimir Putin? But the West can't do that, can they? And anyway, who's to say his successor might not be equally awful?
I think even if they did, it's to misunderstand the dynamics within Russia and actually the element of popularity that Putin still carries for having stabilised a country that was going down the drain pretty rapidly. My concern really is about what's happening in Europe and the extent to which even our foreign affairs specialists have been revealed as sleeping on the job virtually for a very long time, believing that there would never be war in Europe ever again, underestimating the strength of national feeling and national sentiment amongst people, and now being caught out with a population who've also been kind of disengaged over a 20, 30-year period, who themselves may not have the courage to do what ordinary Ukrainians are doing right now.
Very interesting. That's Bill Derodi. He's Professor of Risk and Security at the University of Bath. Thanks so much for joining us. Ben Habib is staying with me here. The conflict's forced more than 40 million people to leave their homes. That's more than a quarter of Ukraine's entire population, more than 6 million still displaced, 7.7 million estimated to be living as refugees. It really is an extraordinary mess. One of the charities who's been helping many of these people is Shelterbox. And I can speak now with Rachel Harvey, who is the Shelterbox response lead in Ukraine. Good afternoon to you, Rachel.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
Is it getting any easier or is it much, much worse?
I think the people of Ukraine would say that it's going to be bad and will continue to get worse until the war is over, because really that's what it takes for the country, for the people to recover, is peace. But sadly, as we've just been hearing, there doesn't appear to be any prospect of that. It is a different picture depending on where you are in the country. So obviously where the fighting is fiercest in the east, their people are in a pretty desperate situation. It's very hard to get to them. It's very hard for them to get out. In the west of the country, so in areas, say, around Lviv, which people may have heard of, actually there's not that much damage to buildings. That wasn't the scene of heavy fighting early in the war, but that region is now playing host to millions of their countrymen and women. So there's no area of the country that's been completely untouched. It's just that the needs and the damage are different in different parts of the country, and therefore we have to adapt what we do to fit that pattern.
And what is Shelterbox doing in Ukraine, Rachel?
We're on to our 5th project now. We've got 2 running concurrently, 4 and 5, with 2 different partners. The focus for the past couple of months has really been on trying to keep people warm through the winter. Because while at home I'm told that spring has sprung and the temperatures are getting a bit warmer and daffodils are creeping up, in Ukraine it's still in the middle of winter. There's at least another couple of months of really cold weather to go before we see the start of spring proper. So we're providing things like thick thermal blankets, sleeping bags, stoves with a supply of firewood, some solar lights, because people may remember that the Russian attacks recently have been targeting infrastructure across the country, power infrastructure in particular. So if the lights go out, that often means you haven't got any heating, you haven't got any water because that's pumped, particularly in apartments, and of course you can't see anything. So the solar lights, water carriers, and those thick thermal blankets become really critical bits of kit.
It's dangerous too for you and your charity, your colleagues from Shelterbox in Ukraine.
To be honest, we're not going to the places that are the hottest. We're not the poor Ukrainian citizens that are under shell fire. We keep ourselves out of the way so that we don't become another casualty and somebody else that needs rescuing. But we try and get the aid to those places where it's needed. There are amazing Ukrainian volunteers, local foundations, organisations that do fantastic work on our behalf and on the behalf, of course, of their fellow countrymen and women and other international agencies. So we bring the aid into the country. We work with these partners to make plans to work out how to get it to where it's needed, what's the best way of doing that to keep everybody safe. So, for example, if there's an area that's seen a lot of active fighting or has come under artillery attack, you don't want to spend too long on the ground. So the amount of aid you can distribute in any one go is going to be reduced. Whereas in other areas, so in Kyiv Oblast, the area around the main city, things are now pretty peaceful, apart from the air raid sirens going off pretty much daily, often false alarms. Sometimes there will be a strike. But there, because things are slightly safer, you can actually do more quickly. So again, we're having to flex and adapt depending on the circumstances, and it's changing all the time. As the war changes, as the seasons change, so what we provide and the help that's needed is also changing. Different people in different places needing different things. It is quite hard to keep on top of it all.
Well, you're doing a great job, Rachel. That's Rachel Harvey, who's with Shelterbox, response lead in Ukraine. Now, your views on the politics of the day, you're emailing in. James says, on the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, Zelensky's bravery should be commended across the world. He's the only thing stopping Putin from thinking he can walk across and invade the whole of Eastern Europe. We need to give him everything he needs to stop the madman. Send jets now. Aaron says, on the SNP leadership, Kate Forbes has been given an unfair time. She said she won't legislate with her beliefs, so what is the problem? Everyone and every religion has different values. It feels a tad like gotcha politics. And on fruit and veg, Kevin says, I was in Sainsbury's last night trying to get some stock for the weekend and there seemed to be nothing left. Absolute madness. Perhaps another Brexit disaster conference. No, it's not Brexit. It's to do with the weather, I'm telling you. Now, coming up after a quick break, we'll be talking about the GB News People's Poll and how there is a lot of, well, very little trust in either Sunak or Starmer with Brexit negotiations. And it helps that I've got a former Brexit Party MEP, Ben Habib, with me in the studio to talk about that.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Andrew Pearce here on GB News. Well, let's turn to another aspect of our latest GB News People's Poll. It shows there's a lack of trust in either the Prime Minister or the Labour leader Keir Starmer in handling Brexit negotiations over Northern Ireland. Only 12% have confidence in Sunak, 16% in Starmer. But that tells you a lot, doesn't it? The Labour leader who wanted a second referendum is now trusted by more people in our poll than Sunak to deliver. More people are also supporting the rate of corporation tax rising from 19 to 25%. 38% say they support the rate of corporation tax rising from 19 to 25%, 20% opposed. I'm completely opposed. And it continues to be woeful polling for Rishi Sunak's Tory party, trailing Labour by, get this, 26 percentage points. At that level, they'll be heading for an electoral wipeout. Let's digest this with Ben Habib, a former Brexit Party MEP. A week ago, we were talking in this studio. There was a great sense of excitement for some, because Rishi Sunak had gone to Northern Ireland the night before. He was talking to the DUP. The DUP leader talked about progress. Come to nothing. There was all this talk. They was going to brief the Cabinet on Monday, present the proposals on Tuesday. The Brexit deal in the Northern was done, and it's not been done.
It's not been done, and it hasn't been done because the very sensible test set by the DUP, which essentially centre around getting rid of foreign laws made by a foreign legislature and adjudicated by a foreign court in Northern Ireland. That very central requirement is not being delivered by the Prime Minister. You know, we talk about the freedom, the importance of the freedom and sovereignty of Ukraine, and rightly we talk about it, but we should also talk about the importance of freedom and sovereignty of the United Kingdom. And you can't have a foreign legislature making laws and adjudicating them in part of the United Kingdom. It would be like British laws applying in Normandy. Yeah. It's an affront to democracy and indeed human rights. And that Sunak should try and foist a deal on the DUP, on the British people, on Parliament, claim that it's resolving the protocol problems, not be prepared to put the wording forward, not be able to declare unequivocally at PMQs that actually the ECJ will be removed from Northern Ireland. That's at the crux of this thing.
Yeah.
Tells you everything you need to know about the deal and why the electorate are right not to trust Sunak.
And if they were here, the Prime Minister or his people, they'd say, oh, well, look, the European Court of Justice almost certainly will never be required to intervene in a dispute over trade in Northern Ireland. But the fact they can means it shouldn't happen.
Absolutely right. I think that the plan was to intercede British courts before anything got back to the European Court of Justice. But the ECJ would have the right to pull cases in. It would be looking down the necks of British judicial system to make sure it was enforcing its will. It comes back to the same thing. What Rishi Sunak needs to recognise is that Northern Ireland is an equal member within the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And any agreement which doesn't recognise that, doesn't restore Northern Ireland to the United Kingdom, must be rejected. And I think he's going to have egg all over his face very soon if he tries to bring this deal forward. And if he doesn't try to bring it forward, he's going to need some really political quick stepping to explain his actions over the last 10 days.
From the Tory MPs I've talked to in the last week, the only way he could get this through is with the support of the Labour Party, which would then make him look even weaker.
Think about the optics of that.
Yeah.
Labour Party, and let's make no mistake about this, notwithstanding the poll, Starmer wants the entire United Kingdom in regulatory alignment with the EU. That, in effect, would defeat Brexit.
Yeah.
And, you know, that he would need to rely on Starmer,
the man who tried to get us into a second referendum.
A referendum to do the deal in Northern Ireland would inform the public that actually this is a lousy deal for the UK.
What do you say to those people who say, oh, I'm just fed up with it, just get it done? The European Court will only be involved slightly or maybe. We just want to get it done and put away.
Well, what I say to them is this. The Northern Ireland Protocol is not just about Northern Ireland.
Quite.
It is about the United Kingdom. And if Northern Ireland is subject to changing EU laws, then as those laws change, Northern Ireland will slowly diverge from Great Britain. It'll slowly float off in a regulatory, economic and political sense. And we will lose Northern Ireland. So if there's anyone in this country who believes in the importance of the United Kingdom, who believes in our freedom, believes in our sovereignty, and one would hope that His Majesty's government did, then they should ditch the protocol. It's binary.
Oh, yeah. That's Ben Habib. He's with me here until 2 o'clock. And as I say, we thought this time last week a deal was about to be done, but nowhere near it. Still to come in a few minutes, we'll be talking to a British host who's been looking after your Ukrainian family. But now we're going to get the headlines with Rhiannon.
Andrew, thank you. It's just gone 1:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. A minute's silence has been held across the UK, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain's imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. In Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the past 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died following Russia's invasion, which has resulted in the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Junior doctors will stage 3 days of strike action next month. The British Medical Associations announced they'll walk off the job from the 13th of March. Nearly 37,000 BMA members voted in favour of industrial action, the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors. And Puffin UK has announced Roald Dahl Classic Collection will keep the author's original texts in print. It follows criticism of recent editing of his work to remove potentially offensive language. It's understood Puffin will continue with the publication of the amended texts as well as releasing the originals. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Andrew.
Well, coming up in a few minutes, we'll be talking about that Roald Dahl U-turn, or partial U-turn, that Rhiannon mentioned there in the headlines, with the author and former MP Geoffrey Archer, the best-selling novelist that he is, and a couple of our GB News viewers.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, since Russia invaded Ukraine, the human costs and injuries occurred, of course, is enormous, but there's an economic cost as well, right across the world, given the importance of both countries as commodity exports. A year on from the start of war, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, examines the economic cost to this country of the war in Ukraine, which is 1 year old today.
A year ago today, Russia invaded Ukraine, sparking a war that's already killed and injured hundreds of thousands, with no end in sight. The related economic war between Russia and the West has caused sharp rises in the cost of fuel, utilities and food across the world, not least Britain. Russia's historically provided 40% of the natural gas used across Western Europe, while pumping 10% of oil used worldwide. Those supplies have been disrupted. In January 2022, before this war, unleaded petrol in the UK averaged £1.46 per litre. 6 months later, forecourt prices peaked at £1.94 per litre, up more than a third, with prices going above £2 in some parts of the country. Prices have since eased, with unleaded petrol averaging £1.48 so far in February. So petrol prices are roughly back to where they were before the war. But diesel prices, as lorry drivers know, are still around 10% more expensive. Gas and electricity bills, though, are still much higher. In 2021, the average household spent around £1,300 a year on their combined utilities. That cost is now over £2,600, still more than double pre-war levels, despite wholesale energy prices coming down. Russia and Ukraine are also major exporters of wheat, grain and other foodstuffs, impacting prices everywhere. Since the war, UK bread prices are 20% higher, with eggs and milk up 29% and 39%, given the impact on the cost of farmers' feedstocks. And it's this combination of more expensive fuel, power and food that's seen British shoppers endure sky-high inflation. Already 5.5% last January, inflation spiked to 11.1% in October, a 40-year high, and remains in double digits today. That's left the Bank of England with no choice but to raise interest rates from 0.5% last February all the way up to 4% now. Those higher rates have raised mortgage costs, just as inflation has caused pay disputes and the worst strikes since the 1970s. While war is first and foremost a human tragedy, of course, there are economic costs as well. 1 year on, the costs to the British economy and living standards have already been very significant. And there's more to come.
Liam Halligan. Now, Ukrainians from across Swindon, which is my hometown, actually, are gathering at a pub in the town. They're launching a special craft beer inspired by their country from a local brewery. Let's go live to the Tab and Brew pub in Swindon now, where our reporter Jeff Moody is doubtless sampling that beer.
I am. It's a bit early in the day, but no, I am sampling the beer. It's a really lovely mix of Ukrainian ingredients. There's some Ukrainian honey in here, and it tastes very nice indeed. Sunflower seeds in it as well. We're expecting around 200 to 300 people to cram into this bar tonight. Ukrainians from across the town and also host families too. Let's have a quick chat to some of the people who've come here nice and early for an early taste of that beer. Sophia, you've been here since last April, and very recently you walked from Swindon right up to Scotland to raise money for Ukrainian charities. How was that as an experience?
It was my way to show Ukrainian braveness and help Ukrainians.
Now here we are, exactly a year since the invasion. How does that feel?
It is a year of tears, pain. It is a year of prayers, but it's also the year since the moment that I realized that God created the hard situation for us to open up our hearts and be creative in creating a project to help Ukraine and Ukrainian people who came to the United Kingdom.
Sophia, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's talk to Chris, who's one of the organisers here at Swindon Welcomes Ukraine. Hello to you, Chris. Are you surprised by the reaction in Britain? It's been a very positive reaction, hasn't it?
It has. I'm not really that surprised. I think the people of this country, and especially in Swindon, saw what was going on last year this time and thought we need to do something, as did I. We need to host, we need to support the Ukrainians that are coming over. So when some of the first came over to Swindon, we set up a group and started looking at all the major pressing needs like education and language and getting kids into schools so we can support them as best we can. It's been a really tough time for them, obviously having to come over in the first place. So anything that we could do makes that situation better. And it's really fab to have partnered with Hop Kettle on a beer to raise money for charities and raise money for the committee.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you very much. Let's have a quick chat to Anastasia. Anastasia, how long have you been in Britain?
For now, it's 10 months.
10 months. And how do you find it?
It's true. It was very difficult just go from my country with one bag. And when I come here, I just don't know English very well. And now it's not perfect, but all people who give me support, my host family and all people on the wheelchair, it was very helpful. For now, I'm happy and have all what I need.
You hear that firsthand, happy, and they have all that they need. What more can we ask for? Well, I'm going to tuck into a beer now, I think, and back to you.
Cheers, have one for me, won't you? Joining me on the show now is Brian Godwin, who took in Irisha Koshinan in May this year and her family who fled the war in Ukraine. Brian, it's been a year since the invasion. How's it going there?
Hi, Andrew. Well, it's going fantastic. We love Irisha. We were able to get the boys over. They've been with us now, settled in school. They're both at the same school. And just a couple of months ago, we were successful in getting Valera, Irisha's husband, over as well on a Scottish visa. But he's now down in Buckinghamshire, very close to the home. So the boys can see their father, which is just wonderful.
And what's it like having this now rather large extended family, Brian?
It's like having another daughter and another 2 grandchildren and another son-in-law. It's fantastic. Of course, it gets a bit cramped from time to time, but we make do, and they're just lovely people. We wouldn't change a thing.
Irisha, what about you? How is it for you?
I'm happy. My family is safe, and this family is brilliant. Brian's wife is my best friend now, and thank you, Brian.
Great. How do you get on with English cooking, Irisha?
Oh, I like.
You do?
Yeah.
Roast beef and Yorkshire pudding?
Chicken pie.
Yeah, chicken pie is best.
Chicken pie. and the children, how are the children coping?
Children good at school. My older son, 11 years old now, and he do very well. He speak English, he start to speak, and for youngest son it's a little bit hard now.
Right, of course.
It's very challenging. It's very challenging, Andrew, because they've been ripped out of their home into a new country. They don't know anybody. The language is alien to them. But they're both great boys. They've engaged with the school. They've joined the local football clubs. They're absolutely a credit to Arisha and Valera. They're doing very well under really tough circumstances. So we're just here to support them and hope that they're, feel some security.
Sure. And Brian, are you getting enough support from the government?
Yes, is the short answer, Andrew. We really are. I think, obviously, financially, we get $350 a month. We get the $150 top up now, which is a significant amount of money. It really does help with the heating, the transport costs, other little bits and pieces. But far more than that, Bucks County Council have been absolutely superb. We've got a liaison officer we can contact at any time. She's put us in touch with all the groups we need to. She knows who to put us in touch with when we need people on education or health or anything. So, I'm not a great fan of Boris, but to be fair, he did a great job with this.
Just finally, Arisha, what about your other members of your family back in Ukraine? Are you able to speak to them on the phone or by email?
Yes,
Can you keep in contact?
My mom stay in Ukraine, and I speak with her. Try to speak every day, but now it's hard because no electricity all the time.
All right.
Well,
look, the very best of luck to you and to your family. That's Brian Godwin, who took in Arisha Kochinen and her family a year ago. And look, they seem pretty happy to me, don't they to you? That's a nice story,
That's
Benabeeb,
a great story.
isn't
I
it?
was smiling all the way through.
Yeah.
That's wonderful to behold.
And that's Britain at its best.
So to all those lefty, bleeding heart lawyers who want to, complain about safe routes to the UK not existing, well, there you go. There's a fantastic example of how the United Kingdom does a refugee programme. And there are nearly 200,000 Ukrainians in the UK. And they've all come in the last year, legally.
Yeah. And look, and those Arisha's children are learning English.
Yeah, terrific.
Playing in the local football team.
And wasn't Brian a nice man?
What a nice guy. And of course he admits, look, it's been a bit congested and crowded. It must be. I mean, it's a big ask for someone to take on a family.
It's a huge thing to do.
And it could have been, they might have thought the war was going to last 3 months. It's been a year already.
Yeah, good for him. And, and good for him for not complaining about the level of support as well. It must be tough, and yet he embraces the task, is grateful for the support he's getting, and he even gave Boris Johnson a slap on the back. Now, that's a rare thing, isn't it?
Dear old Boris. Now, that's Benabeeb. Now, some of you may have been following the outrage, absolute outrage, over the publisher Puffin rewriting Roald Dahl's classics such as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, no longer allowed to call the child who eats all the chocolate fat. It's all to do with wokery. It prompted the Prime Minister to wade in against the changes, and the Queen Consort Camilla at Clarence House last night, she'd made a veiled intervention. It seems there's now been a partial U-turn, with Puffin saying it will publish Dahl's unedited classic texts alongside the newer woke version of the books. Well, what Camilla said last night to a meeting of authors was, do not be censored. Be like lions, don't be like mice. And I think she was speaking all common sense. Joining me now is the best-selling author, Jeffrey Archer, who I know knows Camilla, the Queen, very well. Jeffrey, good afternoon to you. Good luck to the Queen, I say.
I think it was no more than common sense, was it? I had the privilege of knowing Roald Dahl. Indeed, 3 of my short stories were on his Tales of the Unexpected, so I worked with him as well. And he would be appalled. He'd be absolutely shocked. He'd say, I can hear him saying, go to hell, you publish my books, or you can not publish them. You can see from that picture, he was a curmudgeonly old thing and not easy to deal with.
Jeffrey, on what basis can a publishing house change a book that's been in circulation? I think I checked. This book was written, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he wrote in 1964. How are they allowed to change the words that he used?
I presume they approached the family. In my own case, my publishers approached me some time ago on Cain and Abel and said, we've read it through and would you consider any changes? They then admitted that although 100 million people had read Cain and Abel throughout the world, they'd never had one complaint. And I said, I think we'll leave it as it is. Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, the version written 40 years ago is the version that's in the shops now.
What was the area they were contemplating that you might agree to have change? Was it gender?
Well, it's often a thing like girl for woman for lady. It's something that, you know, now, I mean, the latest I've had on another of my books is, would I change West Indian lady to Caribbean woman? And I think on balance, as it's set in 2002, I'll stick with West Indian lady, but I'm being asked to change it to Caribbean woman.
And you're going to resist?
Well, when I was up at Oxford, Andrew, the captain of the Cambridge team was captain of the West Indian team for the Olympic Games. I don't remember him saying to me, Geoffrey, I'm captain of the Caribbean team.
What book was that? Is that in, Geoffrey, where they wanted you to change it to Caribbean woman?
The very latest one that will be coming out in a few weeks' time. They're just editing it now, and we've rightly decided we'll leave it as it is. Thank you very much. I mean, the bigger subject, you've got a problem, of course. There are some. People don't know where the word woke came from, Andrew. Woke came first in 1928, when 6 black men were accused of killing a white policeman, and they were innocent. And songs came out and poems came out that were described as woke and were in support of black people, quite rightly, who had been ill-treated. So that's where it came from. It changed suddenly. I mean, it's moved in the way words have moved, subjects have moved, but it changed quite suddenly in the last 10 or 15 years, where it was no longer has its original meaning. The word now, woke now, means something totally different. And that changed in 2017, when a young girl was described as woke. And it moved in a totally different direction. Now, I am of the opinion that the original meaning in 1928 was good enough for me. This modern translation of woke, where everyone is wrong except the handful of people who are right.
All right, Geoffrey. Geoffrey, thanks for joining me. I have to leave it there.
I'm 82, boring, out of touch, don't know what I'm talking about. So it's possible I'm 100% wrong.
No, I don't think you are, Geoffrey, and it's great to have you on my show for the first time. That's the best-selling author, Geoffrey Archer, whose books still reach the top of the bestsellers list. Time to get some of your views on the stories we're discussing today. Joining me on the show is Julie Shaw and Sean Fox. Julie, what do you think about the cost of the war in Ukraine and how it's impacting us here?
Right. Well, I look at the humanitarian side of it rather than the cost, regardless of the fallen infrastructure and the length of time it's gone on. I'm really concerned about the traumatic effect this war is going to have on the people, particularly the children, possibly for the rest of their lives. I mean, not just those witnessing the horrors on the ground, but over 6,000 children have been kidnapped, taken to Russia, and put into re-education camps, as they call them, for forced adoptions and military training. That's 6,000 innocent young minds corrupted forever. 6,000 childhoods snatched away in the most horrific way imaginable. And the over 200,000 refugees that have joined us in our country, they must be all traumatised. I mean, they're trying to put on brave face. I saw that lady earlier. She's having a great time where she is. But the children, it must affect them for the rest of their lives. They're all going to need massive support, mental health support for a lifetime.
Yeah, Sean, let's bring in you now. Give us what your thoughts are.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here again,
Pleasure.
Andrew. It's a pleasure. Regarding the Ukraine war, obviously, you know, the British public are very sympathetic to the Ukraine plight and the illegal invasion by Russia, obviously, and we're a very giving society, we're very giving people, we're very generous. But I think we've got to use some common sense here. There's no end game to this war. Taxpayers will ultimately be the ones footing the bill. And even in the aftermath of the Ukraine war, the reconstruction of the country is going to fall on the taxpayer. So while we're sympathetic with the plight of the Ukrainians, Slava Ukraini, of course, but Slava Ukraini over time is going to cost. It's a very expensive phrase, actually, for British people. Very expensive. And I don't want to sound like I'm unsympathetic. I'm not. I'm just a realist. And we've got people in this country who can barely afford the basics, let alone luxuries. There's a cost of living crisis here. There's a education problem here. There's no police officers being funded correctly here. While we've got Rishi Sunak rushing off to Ukraine to go and meet Volodymyr Zelensky and walking down their streets. We're not looking at the streets of Great Britain and the problems we're going through.
All right.
James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, New York. I mean, we've got to look at our own domestic issues.
Sean, I'm just going to go back to Julie very quickly. Julie, just very briefly, Roald Dahl, the nonsense over changing the wording. What's your view on that?
It's ridiculous. I mean, they tried to ban Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. 9 times they tried to ban that because of his profanity-laden speech, etc.
Yeah.
I'm an author myself, and the things I write, they'd make your toes curl. It's absolutely ridiculous. Imagine having to write a character on par with, say, one of the Cray twins, and he comes out with something like, listen, you terrible person, you've got me into somewhat of a tizzy, and now I'm going to have to stab you up with my knife that conforms to British standards. Yep. The gangland buyers would love that, wouldn't they?
They certainly would.
There's Kimberly Chambers, Martina Cole, Amanda Sue Heller.
Yeah.
We're all going to get banned.
Don't get banned, Julie. We don't want you banned. That's Julie Shaw and Sean Fox, GB viewers joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. Ben Roald Dahl.
Yeah, so, I mean, at one level, you can just dismiss it as ridiculous, roll your eyes and move on. But at another level, it's pernicious.
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening here is the hijacking of the British language.
Yeah.
And it goes in step with the hijacking of our culture, our values, our heritage, our self-confidence. And the woke movement, which Sir Geoffrey Archer briefly talked about, that's what the woke movement is.
Yeah.
It's designed to make British people lack self-confidence, to start questioning where we came from, not to be proud of our history, to be ashamed of it. And that's what they're doing, and they're doing it through the language. And we've got to be very careful. So, you know, when I fight for Northern Ireland to bring it back into the UK, this is another one of the same... It's another battle in the same war. It's the reclamation of Northern Ireland, the reclamation of our language, the reclamation of our values, the reclamation of our history, our heritage, our pride. All of these things are under attack, and we need to reclaim all of them.
And the pathetic compromise Puffin have come up with.
We'll
continue with the woke version, but we'll have the unedited version too.
Well, if the unedited version is so offensive, how do they justify publish
it in the first place?
Absolutely.
And it still sells millions of books all around the world.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
And I grew up with Roald Dahl.
Yeah.
I grew up with Catcher in the Rye. I had no idea Catcher in the Rye was a seminal sort of book for me. It was a...
And the point is, if you read the book to a child, and you might say to the child, probably best not to call somebody at school fat, you can have a conversation about it.
Absolutely. And there's another thing here, Andrew, without wishing to go on at length, but... often when I want to get a proper take on history, I go back and read a book that was written in the past.
Yeah.
And if they start rewriting books, we'll lose original source material.
You're absolutely right. That's Ben Habib. He'll be back with me here on this show, I hope, at some point. You've been listening and watching Andrew Pierce here on GB News. I'm back with you here on Friday. I'm back every Friday between 12 and 2. And you never know, perhaps this time next week there might be a settlement of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but I suspect not. Rishi Sunak's got a big problem on his hands. Don't go anywhere, though, because up next, it's the briefing with the one and only, the fabulous Arlene Foster, and I think she might have quite a lot to say on what's happening in Northern Ireland. Before that, though, we're going to get the weather, and I've got to tell you, it's rather cold.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every